So I gave the new GPT-5 agent mode a challenge. Build .NET and Blazor apps from scratch. Not just a simple console app, but also a web API, the classic Blazor counter app extended, and even a Blazor server app that calls an external weather API. The results? Interesting. Let's just take a look after you hit that like button. All right, here it is, GPT-5, as you can see here in the top left corner. And if you haven't tried it yet, please make sure to go to the plus and then activate the agent mode. And there you can enter whatever you want to enter. For instance, please create a .NET 9 console application that works like a simple calculator, providing additions, subtractions, multiplications, and divisions. And then here you can actually see what GPT is doing. If again you haven't tried it before, this is what's going on. It is setting up its desktop, and in a second we can also check out the screen that it is working with. And there we are. So here you can see initializing environment and checking .NET version, and you can also read what it is actually doing or trying to do, because maybe later you can see then when we try the weather API, it is even trying to make the API calls, and when an error returns, it is telling us here, and then it tries another way and so on. But I think it also makes sense to just let GPT work here and then have a look at the final result and just test it, right? So let's just do exactly that, because I tried this before, and here, as you can see, we have the result, a simple .NET 9 console application. Lets you enter two numbers. We got these operators here, and it displays the result. Let's just download the result and see if this works. By the way, if you want to poke around in the code for all the projects that I've tested, I've put them all together for you to download. You can get them with the link in the video description below. And while you're already at it, you can also join the waiting list for my upcoming .NET with AI for Beginners course. It's not live yet, but you'll be the first to know when it is live. All right, and here's already our project, and we only got one file so far for this simple calculator. And as you can see, it also writes some comments in here. Entry point for the simple calculator application, additions, subtractions, multiplications, divisions, and so on. So we got our main method, writing a line, simple calculator. Then it says enter first number with console write line. It's trying to parse it. And if something's wrong, it might say input is invalid. All right. Then we can enter an operator. Same thing here. And so on. So let's just try this out. There we are, first number, 1. What happens if I enter 2 now? It is moving on. I enter 3, but now here it says unknown operator 2. Please enter 1 of plus minus and so on. So let's try that again. 5 plus 5 is 10. Great. We can do another one. 6 times 7. Of course, this does not work. All right, this is nice. And then let's try 9 times 8, 72. Okay, so this seems to work. Thank you for using the simple calculator. Goodbye. So for a first simple test, this does work. And I already think this is great, really, if you, for instance, want to learn how to write code, right? Maybe learn C#. This might be a nice little helper, let's say, where you just want to check out what does GPT do, and maybe try this first on your own and then compare, right? It's similar maybe to a real calculator in school. First, you're not allowed to use a calculator. You have to learn the foundations, but later then, when it's getting more complicated, you are allowed to use a calculator, but you know what the calculator is actually doing there, right? You understand what is happening there, and it's the same thing here, in my opinion. So simple calculator, good work. GPT-5 agent mode, good work. Let's try the other one. Build a .9 web API with an endpoint that says, hello, GPT-5 agent. Add scalar, this is what I wanted, add scalar, so that I am able to test the API easily, and please provide the correct URL for the Scalar UI for me, because I always forget the URL for Scalar. Understood? It tries to do that. Result was the same. As you can see here, we tried this one more time, right, with a simple calculator. The screen is now gone, and it's telling us this is the result. And here now we also see the result. It features this endpoint here, which is nice. So you get kind of a documentation here as well, how to use this application. What did it do? It uses OpenAPI now with .NET 9 via services add OpenAPI and map OpenAPI, and it added Scala because we don't have Swagger anymore in .NET 9. By default, of course, you can add it afterwards, but the new awesome kit on the block, what is it? Is Scala. Anyway, Scala is now famous for UI testing, and it is telling me this is the URL I can use. Awesome. So let's just try that and download the code wherever it is. There it is. So, all right, there we are. We even have a README, again telling us how to work with that. This is nice. And only one program CS. Now, this is interesting in my opinion. It is actually quite small, but in essence, it's everything we need. As you can see, we have Scala edit. Let's just check out the project file real quick. Yep, there it is. You see it here. Target framework is .NET 9 and Scala has been added. And now in the program CS, we have comments, which is nice. Create a web application builder, sets up the services and middleware needed for an ASP.NET Core application. But here, as you can see, we got an error. So something is missing. And here we have our endpoint. Now, if we wanted to use controllers here, one thing to learn, we have to prompt it properly, right? Here it is just using the minimal API. But if you are a traditional controller fan like me, then you can, or you have to tell GPT to really use the classic controllers, all right? Now this is from Scala, as it tells us here, add the Scala API reference UI, visiting Scala or Scala v1 in a browser will render modern interface, and so on. But what about this stuff here? It is added, but something's missing. So when we run this, this would not work. We get a build error, but with control and period, we see the suggestion to just install the package ASP.NET Core Open API. And now this should work. And let me just copy the URL real quick and run this. Okay, there we are. This is nice. Again, we just enter the proper URL and there is our documentation and the UI. We have the hello endpoint. We can test the request, hit send, and there it is. Hello GPT-5 agent. So a simple .NET API, really simple one, does work. But again, I have to emphasize, learn the stuff, right? If you are a beginner, don't just rely on the generated code. You really have to know what's going on there. And in this particular case, I think this is not enough. When you start a project, a .NET Web API project with Visual Studio from scratch, you get lots of or more files, more code generated, right? And again, then we have to decide, do we want to use controllers? Do we want to use minimal APIs? All that stuff is something you should know before you try using GPT-5 and build a complete web API, or let it build a complete web API from scratch without giving it more, well, let's say more prompts, more details, what you actually want. But GPT-5 agent mode, good work. I'd say we had to install this package here. This was not available, but anyways, this works. Let's move on because now it was getting interesting. Here I said, please create a .NET 9 Blazor server application. Include the default counter example, but add a button to count in steps of 5 and another button to reset the counter. So here it then tells us it will create a Blazor server app using .NET 9, and I was expecting it to use the render modes, but let's just have a look at the generated code. All right, so we have our solution, we have generated files, but if you already know Blazor, in particular the new render mode Blazor, the Blazor web app, let's say, then you see this is not quite right. We have a host CS HTML file, view imports, don't know what this should be or what GPT-5 wants to generate here. We have the counter, this is great, also with the buttons, right? Here we have a method increment count simply by 1, then by 5, and a reset count button. We have the app eraser, this is also fine. So Anyways, let's just try to run this. And it even works. We can go to the counter. We can use +1, right? We can also use +5 and the reset button. So in essence, it really worked out of the box. But again, I actually wanted something completely different. I wanted it to use the new server render mode. Well, it's not that new anymore, but since .NET 8, we got the render modes, right? And this is the classic Blazor server app. Well, you could say this was my fault because I told GPT to use a Blazor or to create a Blazor server app. And actually, in essence, this is correct, right? So we have the structure of a classic Blazor server app. We have the counter, and it also made the changes or additions. We have new methods. Still, let's compare this with an original Blazor server app. So maybe we see some differences there. Funny thing, by the way, you're only allowed to use .NET 7, which is out of support now with Visual Studio. And here in the generated application, it is using .NET 9. But anyways, as you can see here, structure is kind of similar, right? We have our app raiser, we have our program, CS, the host, CS HTML, no view imports, CS HTML, and the weather forecast example. So this is just what I wanted to show you, that the structure is similar. Still, it is a bit different. And if you don't know what is happening there, it might be confusing. But anyways, as you can see here, by default, this would be now .NET 7. But of course, still, it would work if you have an older .NET 7 Blazor server app, and then you say you want to upgrade it to .NET 9. This does also work. So GPT-5 agent mode, actually, this worked. But now let's do this with the render modes. All right, so let's try that. Don't save it and go back to the browser. And this is the new prompt. Please create a .NET Blazor web app using the server render mode or interactive server render mode. I could say here, include the default counterexample and so on. And then it understood. Here's a simple Blazor web app using the interactive server render mode, a server render mode. The project follows .NET 9 structure, program CS file, which is just interactive server components, and it gives us the resources, how to do it. So when I prompted it, you could really see then again the screen of GPT-5, let's say, and it was scrolling through learnmicrosoft.com, so through the documentation and other pages. And then we see that the render mode interactive server is set. We have the counter raiser where we get these functions, I guess. And then each page uses the interactive server render mode. So let's try this. All right, there we are. And as you can see, something's different now, right? We have no hosts. We have the app raiser file with lots of documentation, which is nice. We have the program CS, which looks strange. So let's just try to run this thing. And it does not run. And here it says, render mode is only valid when used on a component. So here, as you can see, it is trying to use routes with interactive server, but as you can see here, there is no routes component. So let's compare this again to a default Blazor project, a Blazor web app project with the server render mode. Here we can say use .NET 9, please. This is important. Interactive render mode is server. And I think it wants to use the global interactivity location. One more thing you should know when you're doing this as a total beginner. Maybe you don't know what does per page and component mean or what does global mean. And what GPT-5 tried to use here was the global interactivity location. So let's create this thing real quick and then we can compare it. And then as you can see here, there is this routes raiser component. And here now we also have the app raiser where this is in essence the same code. It tries to use the routes component and render it as or with the interactive server render mode. So we actually need this thing here. What we can do, of course, is just copy and paste it or go back to GPT-5 and tell him, it, whatever, hey, there is an error and I don't know what to do. Now this is not what I wanted to try here because I tried it and it did absolutely not work. It did not get what is going on there, what is missing. So yeah, maybe you are more successful with that. So I was just trying to get the application to run. So let's just add the routes component by ourselves. So here now, so maybe let's just copy this thing and paste it right here. Oop, there we are. All right, error's gone, but I think there's still something not quite right. Using namespace directive. Yeah, that's this thing here. But when we just save it, I have a configuration to just remove all the usings that we don't need. So let's try it now. Still not working. So as we can see, it is still not the right structure or the same structure as the default app. So here now, let's just remove the layout. Let's try to run it now. And we get endpoint contains anti-forgery metadata. Use app anti-forgery between use routing and use endpoints. Okay, let's just add it real quick. So here in the program CS, let's add it here and try that one more time. And there we are. Now it works. Design is still interesting, but we can now increment this thing. We can increment by 5 and reset the counter. So again, we got something out of it, but you tell me what you think about it. Is this result sufficient, or would you rather build it by yourself, use the default stuff, and then maybe in particular tell GPT or Copilot, whatever it is, that in this specific file, and maybe I will make a video about that as well, when you use Copilot inside Visual Studio, so in the active document, which would be, in our case, then not this thing here, right? When we can, for instance, open Copilot, open the chat window, and then here, just say in the active document, please add functions to increment the counter by 5 and reset the counter or the number. Maybe this is more practical, right? You tell me what you think is better. But anyways, again, it kind of works. We got some errors, but this just means we have to know what's going on under the hood so we can fix this. All right, next up then is calling a weather API, and I tried it 2 times. All right, so here, this is the console application. Let me just close this so I'm not getting confused. But here now, I tried to build a web app, as I said here, using the server render mode again, that calls a public weather API and shows the current temperature of a place the user can enter in a text field. And here again, it created a Blazor server application, and I can already spoiler this did not work at all. Let me just show you the code real quick. Okay, as you can see here, Blazor again with our program CS, but you can already see that we have again the host CS HTML imports file. We have models, which is nice, right? So we can totally work with that maybe. And then here also data for the service. But when we try to run this, first we got the following. This is simply not working. And it is an older Blazor server application. So I actually wanted something different. So let me just close this and continue, because I thought GPT-5, you can do better. So maybe I just prompted it wrong. So again, I tried, please create a .NET 9 Blazor web app using the interactive server render mode with the following features. The user can enter a city in a text field, and the app then provides the current temperature in Celsius and Fahrenheit. Use any free weather API for that, where we don't need an API key. It should just work out of the box. And then it tried something for 8 minutes, as you can see here. Then it uses the Open Meteo API, which is free and doesn't need an API key, which is nice. Added the interactive server components or the interactive server render mode, whatever is necessary to do that. And then it gave me this thing here. So let's just try that. And finally, there we are. We have our components, our pages. Let's try to run this. And it doesn't work. But what is going on here? Again, we have a WebAssembly namespace, which we actually don't need because we are using Blazor server. So let's just remove it. And now it seems to run, but we have an empty page. Okay. And this was the point where I got frustrated. So what did I do? I had a look at the code, and actually the most important thing here was this looks strange, the app Blazor, was under components, the index, right? Here in the program, it also looks strange that we got a main function. You wouldn't actually do that anymore, but now here in the index Razor, this is where the magic happens, right? We have our weather app, we have this this little input field here, and then it is trying to run or use the public API from OpenMeteo first to get the geographic coordinates, so longitude, latitude, and then it is trying to get the weather data. So what I then did was to just create a new Blazor web app using the server render mode and just copy and paste this. Let's try that. So we create a new project, which would be a Blazor web app again. Blazor app 12 is fine. We hit next. .NET 9, please. Server and global. Not sure about that. I think this time it used page and component, but we'll see that in a sec. And actually it doesn't really matter because we just want to copy and paste this. So now here in the Blazor, we see the following. We have then the pages, counter and home, and let's just replace the home by the generated code. There it is. So let me just copy the whole thing and go here and paste everything. I already see something's missing here. So we just add the using directive. And when we run this, it is actually here, but we don't have an HTTP client. So let's compare this again because, by the way, this is funny, right? It doesn't require an API key. What is this? I think this is I don't know what this is. Do you know what this is? Please tell me in the comments what this is. Okay, anyways, we need the HTTP client. So let's have a look at the generated code. Nope, this is my Blazor, this one. Yeah. And here I think it, yeah, added HTTP client. So here now you can learn, register an HTTP client so that Razor components can perform HTTP requests. We don't have that in our solution yet, but here now, let's go to the program CS, add it real quick, save that, and now restart the application. There we are. This looks nice. So now let's just try to enter, I don't know, Miami. Return does not work. Get weather. This is sad. Response status code does not indicate success. So what can you do now as a beginner? And again, I'm emphasizing beginners because I think that lots of beginners think, hey, I can just let AI do all the stuff. Or not even beginners, people that don't know how to code, for instance. And if you're experienced, you know, well, let's just debug this thing, and if you really want to, and find out what's going on there. So let's just do that real quick. So we run this in the debugger, and we add breakpoints. And please let me find the correct file. So in the home, I think maybe there is the place where something is happening. So let's go back to the browser. Again, we enter Miami, get weather. And here now we see when we step over this thing that here everything is fine. We get the geodata with the results, latitude, longitude, name, great. Please pay attention here because we see the period sign, right, for the value. Now let's just continue. I move on, step over this thing, and then when you look here, the weather URL, now we have a comma here. And this simply does not work. We can even copy this thing here and try this in the browser, like that. And it says latitude must be in range of -90 to 90. So I don't know. I just then saw, okay, it probably has to do with the comma. You hit return and then you get your values. So this is now really a situation where you can ask GPT or Copilot or whatever, okay, how do I actually change that, right? So that we really get the period sign and not the comma sign. So what you can do now is you go back to the code and then copy the whole thing, maybe. Then we go back to GPT. I think this was the one. I got the following error. When running the second API call, the values of longitude and latitude are using a comma, how can we make sure that a period is used? Okay, here's the complete code. I paste this. And now a little spoiler. Again, it's using agent mode. I actually didn't want that. But anyways, I also tried it with GitHub Copilot, and this worked pretty nice or pretty well, because with GitHub Copilot, and I can show you that in a minute, I can tell it to use the current opened document, and then it is trying to apply the change. So I actually don't have to copy and paste stuff anymore. This is just working beautifully. So let's see what GPT is doing. And there it already told us the solution with the invariant method. But let's just see what it's doing. So what's happening is that string interpolation, location latitude, uses your computer's current culture when it turns a double into text. On German systems, the decimal separator is a comma. So the URL ends up as latitude and so on. All right, what do we have to do? To avoid that, format the numbers with an invariant culture or explicitly convert them to strings with a period. Here's how you can change your search weather methods. And okay, now my job here is to look up the code right in Visual Studio, find the right place, copy and paste it, and then it just should work, right? So let me just copy this now, go back to Visual Studio. Then, where is it? I think, yeah, this is the correct solution. Now here we would have to do that, right? We can say now let string, let long string, culture info, and then we have to replace the parameters down here. But I actually don't want to do that. So let's go one step further and actually use GitHub Copilot for that. Sorry about that, because we wanted to test GPT-5, but I like how this works. And now we have the active document here. So let me just copy my prompt and go back to a Visual Studio here, paste this. I got the following error in the current document. When running the second API call, values of longitude and latitude are using a comma. How can we make sure that period is used? And wait a sec. This is just ask, but we also have an agent mode here. So let's try that. And by the way, you can also tell it here, for instance, that it can include the whole solution. But now it's just the active document that is interesting for us. So let's try that. You see, this is not the reference. The home Razor file is totally correct. It is doing its magic, and in a sec we should get a response. All right. Okay, you see it is doing something. Building now already. Build succeeded. Okay. This is interesting. With AI, you get different results every single time. Okay, what was it doing? Cause on systems with culture and so on and so on. Fix applied. Convert latitude, longitude to strings with invariant culture. All right. Edit using system globalization. This currently, okay, but what did it actually do? I can here now say keep or undo. And there we see the changes. So it pretty much did the same thing, right? Latitude, longitude, location, latitude to string, invariant culture. And then it replaced the arguments. Okay, let's keep this. I like it. And let's try that again. There we are. We enter Miami, get weather, and it works. Awesome. So this is now how you can use GPT-5 and Copilot together, or you just switch to Copilot completely. And maybe this is something I will do in the next video. So GPT-5 agent mode. It can definitely help with .NET and Blazor, but it is also definitely not perfect. In my opinion, it can save you time, but you still need to know what's going on under the hood. This is crucial. You have to understand the code. Now, what do you think? Have you tried coding with GPT-5 yet? Share your thoughts, ideas, or even your own test results in the comments, please. I read every single one. And if you want to know if AI is replacing us developers anytime soon, just check out this video here on the screen.